Hmm. Hello there, Julia.
Hi, Rita.
I'm so happy to be here with you.
Me too. I feel like our last conversation was super inspiring, and we're continuing the conversation today and talking workplace inclusion, knowing that it really has a lot to do with consciousness raising. So I want to throw it to you and let you introduce the subject.
Yeah, because today we're having this very, very important conversation, a conversation relevant to every organizational leader and entrepreneur as well, who is invested in building a brighter future. And what I love is that we're going to dig into the S in the ESG, the social component of business and key factor that differentiates today most progressive companies. So we are going to talk about inclusivity. And inclusivity is the essential variable to creating a thriving and sustainable organization that I would say fully harness the talent potential of people at work. And then again, so many organizations are actually far less inclusive than they think they are. There's a lot of dreaming going out in this space. And so today we are opening our eyes to the various levels of inclusivity within the workplace. And I'm so excited to invite them also, you, the viewer, the listener, to really get curious today. Like, how inclusive is your organization? What does your company culture and business practices say about its inclusivity? And how can you build an even more inclusive mindset and company culture? So we are going to be touching on these questions today and really invite you to get involved. So put comments in the chat. First of all, what I'd love to hear, we both would love to hear, is like, where are you listening in from? Put it in the chat so we can get back to it. We both love to connect with anyone showing up here, engage in the conversation, also ask questions on LinkedIn. We're going to get to that as well. So also want to introduce myself. I'm Rita Hausken. I'm founder of Sustainability, which is both a coaching consultancy firm and a practice of cultivating self-awareness, intuition, and creativity for sustainable growth. Personally, though, I partner up and support women in male-dominated industries to achieve the highest level of impact and influence without the hustle and burnout. And join together today is my very good friend, collaborator, and thought partner, Julia Armet, who is the founder of Higher Playbook, a people and culture consultancy advancing the social consciousness of our global workforce. Julia is a master practitioner in energy leadership and uses differentiated educational approaches in promoting learning and development for everyone from executive leaders in our boardrooms to dispersed professionals in virtual spaces. Love that. Her passion for relationship building guides her in designing socially innovative programs that connect to the hearts of people at work. Can relate and know all about that. She partnered with global brands and workplace leaders like myself to design and facilitate transformational social learning experiences for leaders and their teams, where people and culture come together and come alive. So welcome, Julia.
Thank you, Rita. I feel like when we meet in that question of how to create a truly inclusive workplace, and you and I put our heads together, we're really constantly unlocking new approaches. So I feel like for anybody who's listening today and you're just inspired by how we've set the stage here, realize that when we start with just an openness to what inclusivity really means, and we begin to really question our own sense of inclusion and also our inclusivity in our leadership. Both of those questions can do so much in terms of seeing new opportunities. So thank you so much, Rita, for such a beautiful introduction, and I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, I love it. So let's dive straight in. What is inclusion really all about?
Yeah. That question, I know, is going to be really personal to everyone when you're diving in. And for me, I approach inclusion from the lens of a neurodivergent leader. For me, when I've looked at what it really means to be socially accepted in the workplace and what it really means to really feel as though I can be my full self at work, I've defined inclusion for myself as to be able to accept and acknowledge all parts of yourself and allow all parts of yourself to show up within any context. And in that, to be able to have that self-perception, to also really be able to do that for others. And so in the ability to both have the awareness to see yourself and see others, and also in that ability to truly, deeply, genuinely accept yourself and others, what we're doing is we're creating inclusion. So it is all about both the awareness and the acceptance of self and other. And in the ways in which I personally have challenged my own limitations and my identity, I've been able to show up more fully and honor more parts of myself at work, particularly my autistic identity, which I know in today's workplace is just an underrepresented identity. So what I know is the more that we can in our individual identities show up and share fully, what we're actually doing is fostering inclusion for ourselves and others.
Yeah, I love that. And, it brings up my own experience. And I think maybe my experience is something that tend to be maybe also forgotten about, is that hidden level. So having lived with a strongly disabled child with a very rare disorder or diagnosis, with the expectancy of death any moment, and kind of still lived on for many years. Having a child that is different means that people act very different to you. Experiencing not being invited to children's party because they didn't know how to deal with him. So through him, I as a mother was excluded. And it took me some time before I realized that it wasn't until I saw the power of my situation. It wasn't before I saw what I could bring to the table through being uniquely different, having an experience that they didn't have. The majority of people don't have an experience of expecting a child to get severely sick any moment in time or die. So I learned how to tap into resources inside of me that people in general don't get access to. And when I started to access that, I did the kind of what you do as well. It's like you honor it and then you bring it to the forefront of everything you do. And what I want to say is that the result of that is that I could bring such power to an organization. I knew what I could bring to the table. I knew what grit was all about, standing in it. I know how my brain was operating when things was really hard and the pressure was high. I knew that, and I could maneuver things much faster because of my experience. Naturally, people wouldn't be able to understand it if I didn't speak about it. And I did speak about it in my organization. And in the end, when I created my own company, I see that as one of my superpowers today. I've proven to myself through the experience.
Totally. Yeah. You speak and you act. That's what I know about you. And just in the story of Benjamin and how you as a mirror and having Benjamin as a mirror, your lived experience there and the awareness that you brought into every space, whether it was the medical spaces or the business world, where you were seeing what you might not have seen prior to Benjamin being born, and then being able to challenge what were accepted standards, what were accepted expectations, what were so normalized and embedded into the way our institutions work that other people might not have been able to see. So both your voice and your advocacy through action, I recognize, and I know that you are a prime example of an inclusive leader, because when you enter into spaces, you're coming with a wide open awareness, very high consciousness. And in that, you're also coming from a very open approach to relationship building. You accept people where they are, and you are very intentional about creating that understanding human to human.
Yeah, I think what I wanted to say to that, I think what I did learn was not to see people who are different, or let's say handicapped, as less resourceful, as somebody I needed to help because they couldn't help themselves. I never saw that. I saw each person as another person, again, powerful beyond belief, that could do with a different added equipment or system, so that brilliance could shine through, because it was just different. But it wasn't to come from, oh, you need some help. Okay, I'm gonna create that equity for you, so we're gonna, help you because you're not able to help yourself. No, it's to see them powerful, and then base it from there. It's just they come from a different angle. So that's been important for me.
Integrating more perspectives into the social fabric of any environment. So that definitely is something that we can talk more about today.
Yeah. I'm curious though, if we go back to the workplace, what does it mean to have an inclusive workplace?
Yeah. In creating an inclusive workplace, it really is about having high awareness to the diversity of perspectives, high awareness to your own self, that self-awareness. And in that, high acceptance, meaning there's relationship building at the foundation of how the company works, where you really are open and curious to understand the people who you work with, not for any other reason, but to truly invite more perspectives in and include those perspectives in the way the business operates. It really means being able to see one another human to human and ensure that we are integrating the identities of every contributor into the way business operates.
Yeah. I know we're going to dive into, all angles of this today. We're going to dive into your methodology, what higher playbook. But I'm still curious to just dive in another place. Have you experienced being in a non-inclusive environment?
Yes, and I would like to preface this with the reality that when a company is not inclusive, that is a perspective. So in the reality of my own perspective, experiencing the gaps in inclusion, it just brings to the surface that every person's lived experience can showcase the opportunities that can exist for organizations. So in my experience, on the outside, I feel like a lot of people could say, oh, you're definitely included here. You're definitely a part of this company. But in the limitations that are set, because let's say we've standardized these expectations, we've set these regulations, we've set these policies, and we've set these rules around what is and what is not acceptable. I learned to mask very early on in my professional career, because I recognized that for me to be included and for me to have a job, it really was a matter of meeting the expectations that were set by whoever the decision makers were. And so in that, what I want to highlight is, because the awareness wasn't necessarily there within the culture, what ended up happening was, while it could seem like people are accepted, with the social unawareness, what ends up happening is you're accepted within certain conditions. And so that conditional acceptance, I believe, is very common in many workplaces. When you are asking yourself, I'm accepted, ask yourself, under what conditions? And that brings to the reality that we as professionals might learn to mask, because we realize that for us to be included and socially accepted, it is really a matter of doing what has been defined versus opening up the space to personalize and differentiate our approaches so that we don't have to mask at work. And instead, we can really show up and say, wow, I prefer working from home because the sensory overload that can happen when I'm in a workplace that's not really designed for me can be too much. Or, I prefer to create spaces where we don't conform to an agenda, but we allow for the free flow of thought, because the divergent thinking that I know is at the foundation of my own contribution emerges when I have that space in collaboration with others. So it is really a matter of seeing that when we set standards and we are potentially creating those conformance and compliance aspects of our business operations, opening our eyes to how we can really see and honor more perspectives in the design of how our operations work.
Yeah, I think that is so insightful. And I'm thinking also about why it's so important now more than ever. I'm thinking, again, with the women that I'm working with, the thing that I experienced through their stories over and over again is this feeling of, I have to conform to the rule inside this company in order to succeed, which is therefore not very inclusive. As long as I do this in the very linear way that's always been done, I might be able to succeed. The minute I challenge anything, I challenge status quo, that's when I hear the comments like, we don't speak like that here, we don't kind of argue the case like that here, our culture is this. And so many women are therefore coming to me and basically saying, how long are we going to tolerate this? Because we're not moving, we're not being able to change anything. So I would say now, when there is a lot of focus on DEI, and if we're thinking about women as a big proportion as well on that, we will never get access to women's brilliance, but of course all people's brilliance, if we are constantly asking people to just conform and play themselves smaller, because we fit them into something which is kind of just post-industrial revolution setup, factory floor thinking. So I think it's really timely that we have this conversation right now.
And whether the leadership ideal or the cultural ideal was set through, let's say, male lens in this case, or let's say that cultural ideal or leadership ideal was set through a more neurotypical lens, it's going to be important to realize in the design of our experiences, whose perspectives are we inviting in, so that we are ensuring true inclusion and not just inclusion within the narrow perspective of whoever might be bringing their one perspective to the table. Multiplicity of perspective is ultimately what enriches the design of any experience.
Yeah, and that brings us into the tool that you have to share with us today. I think this is just so important to bring up. It's going to help our listeners to dig in and see, how can I see the status of my own organization, and what can we do to help it? So If we are going back to the question, what does it mean to be an inclusive workplace? Can you help us understand it a bit more through your Hire Playbook tool?
Absolutely. So I'm going to introduce right now a Hire Playbook tool called the Social Axes for Workplace Inclusion. And this tool is really intended for you as a leader to have immediate insights on the current level of inclusion of your workplace. And that's really the starting point, when we can really deeply assess what's actually happening within your workplace by measuring that further. Then we can know the work to be had in terms of raising awareness along with deepening the relationships that exist. So I'll be sharing the screen right now to show you this proprietary Hire Playbook framework called the Social Axes for Workplace Inclusion. On this framework, what we are seeing is two axes. When I spoke about what inclusion is, I spoke about high levels of awareness along with high levels of acceptance. So in the creation of a truly socially inclusive workplace, it's important to know the possibilities that could exist as well in terms of meeting yourself where you are. I'm going to talk about the aspiration first. Then I'm going to go into what really are more common workplaces that we'll see. So while many people aspire to be a socially inclusive workplace, that's actually not going to be the majority of workplaces today. This is the future of work that we're designing. So the aspiration is much more of what I know is possible when we can bring more perspective to the design of workplace experiences. So first, let me explain the possibilities of people in relation to their work. When we're looking at people in the workplace and we are asking ourselves, am I accepted? Am I expected? Am I rejected? Or am I accepted? That's going to really show you who you are in relation to your workplace. So if you as a leader are realizing that, wow, I've been expected and conforming to a lot of expectations that really are not allowing me to be my full self, you might immediately realize you're in one of these quadrants. If you are realizing, wow, people have made accommodations for me, and it's almost as if they are looking to fix things because they realize that I need more help, and that might not allow me to fully utilize my talents. So you're having exceptions made, but in that, those exceptions aren't really normalizing difference, and instead coming from that superiority of better or worse. So we're going to delve into all of these different boxes. For now, though, the aspiration of a socially inclusive workplace is what many of us are here to create. And that's a workplace where difference is recognized and celebrated as part of the whole company culture. So if we're looking at a socially inclusive workplace and what that looks like in practice, socially inclusive workplace create time and space for people to come together, build relationships, have growth fostering conversations, participate in people programs that allow for individuals to play their unique part within community. This is where people are able to share their personal identities, integrate those perspectives into the way business operates. And these are the types of programs that Rita and myself facilitate. Within socially inclusive organizations, people invest in people. So this is the aspiration that I know is possible, especially for conscious leaders who are ready to take that action. I'm going to put that in contrast, though, to what is actually happening around the world when we are looking at the way many companies operate. We're going to start with the extreme, though it is something that is common when we are looking at companies that are exclusive by nature. So in a world where the idea of exclusion is often put on a pedestal because it allows for competition and it allows for that sense of demand because people want to be a part of. When there's barriers to entry, it actually is a way that companies can remain competitive. And that can actually have a devastating effect on people. In a socially exclusive workplace where there are very narrow ideals, difference is not recognized or approved. Let's say a business has a very low acceptance of new partners, or A business has very, very strict expectations and true versions of what a culture fit looks like. In that, what ends up happening is there is a lot of implicit bias, and we're totally not giving space for individuality within the workplace. Instead, we're saying, if you're not this mold, you don't belong. And that's quite, I feel, dangerous in a world that is really evolving in this globalized way, where we live in a world in the United States of America where there's so much diversity of perspective within just our country, that without being able to consider how to honor that in the workplace, we are coming from many of the isms, whether that is racism, sexism, ableism. There's a lot of isms that we are going to be able to challenge when we start to look at our current level of awareness and acceptance. Now I'm going to go into the expected. The socially unaware workplace is really a very common workplace. And so when I talk about this, if this is you, realize that you are doing the best you can. I'm going to put that in quotation marks, because the best you can is based on the limitations of your current level of consciousness. So let's say we've only seen certain images, or we've only seen certain ways of the workplace operating because we've only existed within certain worlds. You are lacking the awareness of what's possible outside of those worlds. And so if you're in a box and you're very accepting within that box, where you are accepting of the people who you work with, you're understanding, and it's understanding under the conditions of. So in a socially expected workplace where people are expected to conform to certain rules, expectations of what productivity looks like, people are said wear this sort of attire or act this certain way, we're going to see many individuals masking their full expression of self. And that is really just the consequence of wanting to be socially accepted and conforming to expectations. In these environments where acceptance is high and yet awareness is low, the recommendation is to bridge the consciousness gap, which really means to elevate the consciousness by first measuring the consciousness with tools like the ELI, and then expanding that consciousness by inviting in more perspectives. That can happen through opening up space for more conversations in the workplace. Those people programs that we design are really intended to foster more space for diversity of perspective so that we can elevate awareness. Now, if we're going to the...
I just want to say one thing, Julia. I want to encourage anyone listening here. I mean, please put in the chat if you recognize any of these behaviors, maybe in places you have been working, or if you don't want to share it, maybe in the chat, please feel free to share it either with Julia or myself, because sometimes just to be aware of it and see it, that is the first step to see what can be done with it. So just please go ahead and share it in the chat. So Julia, please go on.
And also realize that all of these quadrants in the structure here, it is what it is. So if you are coming with just that observation of where your company is, it's totally normal in today's workplace to have limitations on social awareness and limitations on social acceptance. And in that, it is just up to you to be honest. And so in the spirit of that, when we're looking at a very common environment that is often actually seen as the aspiration. So that's going to be the part that most people are going to have a light bulb moment right now. When we are hearing about the way we can design inclusive workplaces in the traditional narrative of business, the deficit paradigm drives the current business world. And so language of accommodations, language of supports, all of that is actually grounded in a socially aware, but yet an the gap is really in the acceptance. Anytime there is a sense of otherness in that we are identifying the other and doing things that are designed to accommodate just them versus all, the design is not universal. Instead, what we are doing is replicating this idea that beings are the exception to the rule. So if I am asking for accommodations as an autistic leader and I'm given exceptions, what ends up happening is it's only for me versus all, and it replicates this idea that my difference is a deficit. So in shifting the deficit paradigm, there is the acknowledgement of how are we coming from a helper or fixer mindset in the way we are approaching inclusion at work. And so if you are noticing yourself saying, well, how can I help underserved communities? How can I help underserved populations? Change the verb. Realize that potentially an underserved population might have perspectives that are transformational perspectives, gifted perspectives, perspectives that could really contribute to the evolution of your company. The true question is, how can we invite those identities to the table so that they can share more about both their needs and their ideas? And so in overcoming the social barrier, the gap that can exist relationally between self and other, we overcome that social barrier by inviting everyone into shared spaces for them to see each other, recognize each other's differences, not deficits, and in the process, co-create what a culture can look like. An inclusive workplace is coming from an openness to see, along with an openness to know. And those processes of building awareness and acceptance will look very different for every workplace, but the theory is the same. It's coming back to the knowingness that when we are all able to see and accept all parts of ourselves, we can see and accept all parts of the other. So I hope this framework excites you. I hope it inspires you. And I would love to ask questions that are coming up. So I'm going to put it back to you, Rita, for you to ask me any questions that you're curious about upon hearing this social axes framework.
Yeah, I think first I just have a reflection of, when I'm looking at accepted versus accepted. And I realize that the majority of organizations that have this saying that we have this unique culture and we hire people that fits our culture, they don't include or really celebrate differences or recognize differences because they want people to become the culture. Whereas the accepted group are the ones that I imagine when they're recruiting people are saying, we are looking for people to add to our culture, not to be the culture, but to add to it so that we can grow and thrive and look for new opportunities and possibilities. So thinking about, kind of looking to create an accepted work culture like social inclusive workplace, which is under the top right quadrant there, accepted, is also to change that narrative. Are we thinking of adding to our culture and look at things from a place of curiosity? And like you said, with people that would say, oh, I want to help them, where they can help actually us. And I love when we can say, what are the superpowers in the differences? So this is super powerful. But I'm curious also, maybe you could explain a bit more. What are the barriers that we need to break to create an inclusive workplace?
Yeah. There's relational gaps, which are social barriers. And then there are consciousness gaps, which are really knowledge gaps and awareness gaps. And so if we're looking at moving beyond us versus them, that really is about the social barrier. And that means it's time to invest in relationship building for the purpose of relationship building. It builds acceptance, it builds a sense of inclusion. When we are looking at the other aspects where really we're looking at living in the dark because we have yet to turn on the light, the increase in the ability to see, which we can look at from the language of consciousness and say that the belief systems that often drive our behaviors that have become accepted as truth, when we can say, wow, how is my belief system blocking not just myself, but preventing the social progress that could be possible when we embrace and integrate the fullness of our perspectives as people. So it is really about the barrier of knowing, which is definitely a consciousness barrier, and also the barriers in relating, which are often the biases that block people from really being able to see somebody who has a difference of experience.
Yeah. I think the work that I see we do in sustainability, where so many organizations are coming to us and say, can you come and help us and create some workshops around, DEI and very often, I come back to the same thing. Are you willing to create deep and meaningful relationships within the organization? Are you willing to pause what you're currently doing to nourish that element? How is your communication? What language do you have? So very often they take it by surprise because they want just this fix. Just give us a workshop on unconscious bias, or just tell us what equity means so we can provide that. Whereas I would say it is easier than they might think. It is to focus on building relationship and then ask ourselves, are we truly ready and in a desire to connect on that level? Because an organization that is deeply connected and then connected to their vision through their values, they are going to succeed. They are the future. And when I'm looking at the axis, I mean, can you imagine, if you're looking at the left rejected quadrant there, it's the death of an organization. Any organization that find themselves there, and there are many of them, they are dying. They are dying. So for anyone, I want to also speak to those who are looking for their opportunities. There are great opportunities out there. And identify through the books here, which organizations do you not want to even get involved in? They don't deserve your attention, because we also get to choose from the outside in.
Yeah. With DEI being such a prevalent goal around the globe for organizations, leaders who right now are working on their DEI, what I want to throw out just based on what Rita has just shared is, ask yourself, are we doing this from a place of complying to this, let's say, new policy so that we can say that we did it, which would be here? Or are we doing this because we know that when we are able to invite this full spectrum of talent to the table, we're going to set us up to experience new levels of contribution. We're going to set us up to experience greater innovation. We're going to set us up to allow for people at work to self-actualize their talents. There's so much that can happen when we examine the motivations and actually shift the motivations that drive our decision making. So I want to highlight that when you are considering how you can create an inclusive workplace and why that's important to you, ask yourself that in the knowingness that whatever approach you do decide to take, when you come from that energy of deeply desiring to promote acceptance and awareness in your workplace, it's going to be a great outcome.
Yeah. And I think what you're also sharing there is that each and one of us can be part of creating this change. It's not to wait like the overarching organization just to change it. By bringing in this to organization and ask questions about it, we can contribute to helping our organization to move forward. But I'm curious about what's the first step, because I also want the audience to know, okay, there is a lot out there. And I say, in my view, just asking for a workshop on tell me about unconscious bias isn't enough. What tools is out there? What's the first step?
The first step in the journey of creating an inclusive workplace is really assessing the current state of your people and culture. And we do that with an assessment tool called the ELI, and that allows us to see the existing diversity of perspective and then encourage more of it. So if you are ready to create a more conscious workplace, that assessment tool is going to give you the data to really see where your company is operating from. And then from there, what we do is we design a people project, a way in which we can have space for perspectives to evolve, have space for perspectives to be shared. Those people projects are L&D programs with an emphasis on relationship building. And the L&D program that's best for your culture is going to really be determined by what we see when we look at the data from the ELI assessment that we do for your group.
I think that's what I love. I mean, obviously, I'm a big fan of the ELI. That's why I was a master practitioner in it. But it's really one of the, it's not the only tool, but very few tools that is truly assessing how we as an organization, how we as individuals perceive the world. And there is definitely a big difference if we perceive everything around us as a threat versus if we perceive everything around us as, wow, that's an opportunity. And can you imagine how it is when we are looking through the lens of, let's say, inclusivity, and everyone is feeling that, wow, what an opportunity we have here. What dialogue do we want to have? What communication do we want to have? What kind of roundtable conversations do we want to have? I mean, that's when we can really create inclusivity.
Inclusivity for the purpose of harnessing the true aptitude and potential of your workforce, because that is when we can actually come from our greatest talents. And it is going to be really beautiful as we continue to become a more globalized world to see the way our business landscape evolves. And I'm really blessed to have you as a partner in this, Rita, and the knowingness that it's the creators, it's the innovators, it's the disruptors, it's the conscious leaders of today who are at the forefront of designing inclusive workplaces that are really inclusive, not inclusive by the former compliance standards that we've set, but inclusive by the perspectives of the individuals who have in the past been very much excluded or underserved by the business world.
Yeah. And I think when we see the results of that kind of paradigm shift, because when everyone feels included, it is a place of belonging. Now the energy that usually goes into, I don't feel I belong, I feel I feel I need to defend myself, or I feel resentful because it's unfair, that energy, which is, it's like the black hole of the universe, is reversed into such powerful energy that now can lead the organization forward, because instead of focusing on that resentment or whatever it is, can be towards what is the greater vision of this organization. And what we do see today, I mean, I'm just thinking now we have another COP meeting happening in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, and we talk about climate change. If we cannot unite in an energetic move towards looking for solutions, looking for opportunities, it's not going to happen. So this is an opportunity for organization to really make a difference by looking inwards, so that I can create something great on the outside as well.
Yeah. And that culture transformation can happen very rapidly when you simply create the space, when you simply invest the time and you invite everyone. So we're really leveling the playing field, and we are, regardless of the environment, it could be the most tense or exclusive work environment that there is, and just bringing everybody into the room and seeing how quickly relationships just naturally take shape, and how quickly people can really get to see new perspectives and adopt those perspectives as their own. It's so amazing. And I'm really grateful that I get to witness these transformations that are happening all around us in the business world.
So thank you so much, Julia, for again a very powerful and so inspiring conversation. I love doing this. And I also want to say to everyone out there, if you are sitting with a desire to understand more about how fast you can create inclusivity in your organization, just connect with us and we will have a conversation with you, and we will see what we can design for you that meets your whatever industry that you're in, because we know that there's some differences there. So just connect with us, DM here on LinkedIn, either to Julia or to me, and we will be so happy to have a chat with you. All right.
I love it. It gets super creative, and I feel like the needs and the unique desires that everybody brings to the design of workplace experiences, that's what makes our facilitation exciting. We love to be creative and inventive in bringing forth new ways of supporting people and bringing people together and providing them value in their professional lives. So thank you, Rita, so much for creating the space here to open the door and invite more inclusivity. And thank you to everyone who has really listened and considered new perspectives today.
Thank you so much. And until then, see you soon. Bye.
Bye.